Great. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's webinar, which is instantly improve the way you give feedback. I'm joined by Tess Aussman. I've listened to a little bit of this webinar myself with some colleagues, and I loved it. I've been excited. It was about two weeks ago, maybe even a little longer, and I've been really excited about hearing this in full. So I think you're in for a treat. Tess is passionate about leadership development and creating a talent revolution in the workplace, where leaders think about the people first instead of sacrificing them for results. She strives to help others grow the skills that will take them to the next level. Like I say, I think there's a lot of really valuable stuff in here, and a lot of different stuff, approaches that I've never really heard before, and really excited by. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Tess, who I'm sure will be much more interesting than I am. Thanks a lot, guys.
Well, hi, everybody. I am really excited to have you here for our session on instantly improve the way you give feedback. And the most important thing that I want to give to you today are tips that you'll be able to use as soon as the webinar is over. These hopefully will be some new tools for your toolkit or some good reminders of things maybe you used to do in the past but have forgotten about or meant to try out at one time and just never got around to it. So I encourage you after we're finished here to practice some of the things in the webinar today. You can practice them with your colleagues. If you're a manager, you can practice them with your direct reports. But you can even go home and practice it with your spouse or a parent or one of your kids. If you've got a teenager or a college student or really anybody in your house that you want to try to practice giving feedback to. So with that being said, let's jump right in. What you say matters at work. And, you don't have to have employees to be a leader. You just have to have influence. And that influence can create either positive or negative feelings among direct reports or peers that you work with. Because when you give infrequent, awkward feedback, it can be demotivating and confusing for others. When you give frequent, open feedback, what you have is 100% no surprises relationship. So, as a manager, your goal should never be to have gotcha moments where your employee feels like prey and like you're jumping on them and you're noticing every little thing they've done wrong. But even if you have even if you don't have direct reports, your colleagues that you work with should also never feel like prey. They should feel like you have a very open relationship where you are going to give them feedback and they never feel like you're pouncing on them. So today you will learn some excellent tips to help people not feel like prey and create a 100% no surprises relationship. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at the two types of feedback: positive feedback and constructive feedback. And there are two little exercises in this webinar where you can practice giving positive and constructive feedback. So in your head, or I'll encourage you to use the chat to share, and hopefully I can share some of those out loud. But then the other piece is, just like I said in the intro, please practice this. You will be able to instantly practice positive feedback today. Before you go to sleep, after this webinar ends, you can give somebody positive feedback today using the model that I'll be sharing. And then you can start to think about how to give someone constructive feedback using the model I'm sharing. So let's jump in. There's two types of feedback. Let's do the easy one first because giving positive feedback is fun. It's really easy. Shouldn't make you sweat, shouldn't make you worry or have to practice ahead of time. What happens a lot at work is that people think they're giving positive feedback when in fact they're just giving praise. So you hear, "Good job in that meeting today," or "Thanks for your hard work." Here's the problem with that. When you only say "good job" or "thank you," you leave it up to the recipient to interpret what you mean. So what if the behavior that you're saying "good job" for isn't the behavior that they interpret that to be. You could be sending mixed messages. The other thing about praise is that it doesn't include any results. So, good job in the meeting today doesn't actually tell me why you think I did a good job. So now I'm interpreting the behavior, and I'm also interpreting the impact of that behavior. So it can be really powerful to put yourself in the frame of mind for positive feedback versus praise, because you will instantly motivate somebody by just including the specific actions or their behaviors and the results of those behaviors. So here's your easy model. It's called the START model. And START is an acronym, and each letter stands for a different component of positive feedback. S is situation. You always want to tell the recipient where you saw this behavior. In today's team meeting, during yesterday's brainstorming session, in the email you sent this morning. Always provide the context. That helps the person go, oh, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. Then you want to be sure that you are referencing an event that happened very recently. So you don't want to say in last week's email or last week's team meeting. That time frame is too long to wait to give positive feedback. You want to give positive feedback as quickly as you can after you see something great happen. Now, before I go to the A, I do want to say that you can handwrite a note when you're doing this. You can send it in an email. You can deliver it verbally. So there are options when giving positive feedback. It doesn't just have to be a face-to-face conversation. So A stands for action. You want to describe the behavior. So in today's team meeting, I was really impressed with how you presented the information about the timeline. R is results. Because the information was so concise and visually appealing, the senior team understood exactly what steps we still need to take. T stands for thank you. Thank you for being so prepared and concerned about making this meeting go well. I sincerely appreciate the effort. So rather than saying, great job in that meeting today, what I've just done is said your attention to detail, your great PowerPoint skills or Excel spreadsheet skills really made an impact on how the senior team thought. Imagine if somebody, rather than just saying a good job, gave you feedback like I just gave. You'd stand up a little taller. You would give yourself an imaginary pat on the back because you feel so connected to knowing how what you did made an impact. You can instantly use this model today. Now, you don't have to say all of these in the same order. You could do the thank you, action, result, situation. You can do this in any order you want. The important thing is just that you get all the components so that the feedback is whole and doesn't leave anything up to the interpretation of the recipient. So let's practice. Now that I've given you the components of the START model, think about this scenario. So we are Danielle's boss. Yesterday, Danielle saved the company $25,000 by discovering an error in a tech system. She didn't tell you directly, but you heard it from the rest of the team what happened. So here's the easy thing. If we were going to give Danielle praise, we would just say, great job yesterday, or thank you for saving the company money. But let's take that a step further, and I'm going to be quiet for about 20 seconds and turn this praise into positive feedback using the START model. I would encourage you to type this into the chat so that I can read some of these aloud. But how would we give Danielle positive feedback instead of just saying good job or thank you? I, of course, can give you the answer, but I'm hoping maybe somebody can throw one up in the chat. So while we're waiting to see if we can get any answers, the first thing that I would be sure to do when giving positive feedback to Danielle in this situation is by telling her the behaviors that it took to discover that error. So this could be because she always comes in early. It could be because she worked through lunch every day this week and you noticed that. It could be her meticulous attention to detail that makes her an excellent coder. So you want to be sure that you wouldn't just say, good job discovering the error in the text system yesterday. You want to attach a behavior to that. Danielle, I heard that you discovered an error yesterday in our text system, and I know it's because of your long hours you've been working to make sure we're successful on this project. Or I know it's because of your super attention to detail. Thank you for being so humble and not sharing, but I'm really proud of you. And you've saved the company $25,000 that we can now use to improve the XYZ system. So thank you. Notice how that would be much more powerful than saying, good job. So positive feedback is just that easy. And I hope you'll use the START model to start turning praise into positive feedback. The second kind of feedback is much more tricky. This is the feedback that gives people hives, that makes them sweat. This is the feedback that a lot of people dread doing because constructive feedback feels tricky. And a lot of times we view it as criticism. Constructive feedback should never be criticism. It should not be judgment. It should be just a statement of fact. And I'm going to give you a process and some tips to help you transition from potentially giving criticism and judgment to stating fact and behaviors. So think of it this way: criticism is a gotcha moment. Constructive feedback is just the opposite. It's a two-way discussion. When criticism is given, a lot of times the recipient feels ambushed and they don't really say anything. They just listen and then they say, okay, thank you, or maybe they don't say at all and they leave. In a constructive feedback conversation, there is agreement on next steps. There is openness to seeing the other person's point of view. And when done well, the employee actually leaves the conversation feeling motivated to change. So, the end goal of criticism is to out judgment. The end goal of constructive is to gain agreement to change behavior. So I want to try something here. We're going to see if this works. And if it doesn't, then that's okay. We're going to launch a poll to see how everybody feels about giving feedback. I want to gauge how you feel when it comes to giving constructive feedback. So go ahead and choose the answer that is most like you. How comfortable are you with giving constructive feedback? You avoid it at all costs. You have to get the courage up to do it. I can do it, but only when it's necessary. Or, hey, it's my favorite. I love it. So it looks like we've got almost everyone voting, and 12% say it's my favorite. I love that. Maybe you can teach this class with me because it is not my favorite. 59% say I can give it, but only when it's really necessary. 39% say I have to get the courage up to do it, and 0% I avoid it at all costs. So I love that nobody is avoiding it. That's great because that is truly the first step in giving feedback, is to not avoid it. And the 39%, I have to get the courage up to do it. Hopefully this process I'm getting ready to share will give you the courage. 59%, I can give feedback, but only when it's really necessary. Again, I think that you're going to get some tips in this next section that will help you want to give feedback more often and not just waiting until it's necessary. Sometimes when we wait until it's necessary, it feels like a gotcha moment. And we tend to do what I call gorge on feedback instead of graze. And that's something I'll talk more about in a little bit. So, hey, thanks for your participation on that. It was really interesting to see how everybody's feeling. Just to tell you where I fall between B and C. Sometimes I have to get the courage up to do it, and sometimes I wait until it's really necessary. So this is still a work in progress for me too, because depending on the person or the situation, constructive feedback just feels tricky, and doesn't always feel good. So let me give you some tips on hopefully how to make it feel better. So first things first, if you don't do this already, promise yourself that you're going to start. Whenever you want to give constructive feedback, you should always ask the other person, are you open to some feedback right now? And it is okay if they say no. Because if they are not open to getting feedback about something that just happened, having the discussion is actually a waste of your time because it's not going to change behavior. Also, they're going to have that defense mode already set up before you start talking. So they may not even listen to you. They may just completely zone out, and you've just wasted your time trying to give feedback. So always ask, hey, Tess, are you open to some feedback right now about how this morning's meeting went? And if I say no, your response can be, I'd really like to talk about it. What time tomorrow is good for you? So now you're giving them a moment because they're not ready for feedback, but you're also saying, this is something we're going to talk about. What time is a good time for you? Now, let's say that my response was, I don't really want to talk about it at all. Hopefully, that's not a response you get. But to that, I would say, it's really important that we sit down. I'd like to do it tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So if you get even more pushback, then you supply the time. Now, you want to be sure, again, that you're asking this question because you want the other person to be open to receiving the feedback. So if you need to give a little, background in order for them to feel more comfortable about having the conversation the next day, you could allude to what you're going to talk about. Hey, Tess, are you open to some feedback about how this morning's meeting went? I think that we could talk through some ways to make your presentation more effective. So that way now I'm not going to be nervous all night thinking that you're going to fire me tomorrow during the feedback meeting. So if you think it's necessary, definitely allude to what you want to talk about. But the other thing is, don't be put off if the person says no. Just agree on a next time that you're going to talk so that you can give them the feedback because you want them to be open. So here is the model. I couldn't get it into a fun little acronym like the START model for feedback. So this is where we are. State, pause, describe, discuss. It's this easy. Here's how it goes. You explain the situation and the behavior that was observed. You don't go into results. You don't go into the 20 times you've seen it. You explain one situation and one or two behaviors that were observed. And then, this is key, you stop. You take a breath and you wait to see what they do. If you aren't too uncomfortable, wait for them to respond. They will fill that silence. When we break each one of these pieces of the process down, I will share with you some questions. Response from them, but you don't have to say anything. You can just stop and wait to see what their response is. This is critical because if you go straight from state to describe, the employee or the recipient will feel ambushed because you're going to be throwing out all of these facts or behaviors or results at them without giving them a chance to process it. So state, pause, describe. In describe, you're going to share the impact of the behavior. So just like in positive feedback where you share the impact, in describe, in this step for constructive feedback, you're going to share the negative impact. Now, you can share more than one, but I would recommend that you not share more than 3 because then again, we don't want it to feel overwhelming for the employee. And I want to be able to remember the impact that you shared, and nobody's going to remember more than 3 impacts. Then discuss. Here's where it becomes a two-way conversation. So in the discuss phase, you're going to talk it out and agree on next steps. Next steps would be the behavior change you're going to see, and if you have to check in again to see if that behavior has changed. This might take a while. So, this whole conversation might be more than one conversation. It might be two conversations over a couple of days. It might be something you start one week and then you check in next week to discuss next night to think through the state and describe phases before you can ever get agreement after them. So just know this doesn't have to be one conversation. And it might be a short conversation, or it might, be an hour meeting that you have with them to get through it, or it might be multiple meetings. Just depends on how intense that constructive feedback is. So let's take a deep dive into each one of these. What I want to share with you now are actual questions that you can ask or actual statements that you can say in each one of these. This will make it a little easier for you. The first thing you want to do is state your observation. So here are the things you can say. I've noticed that. I've noticed that you interrupted a lot in our team meeting last night. Or when you show up unprepared to the brainstorming meeting, it makes everyone feel like you're not doing your part. Or I am concerned that. These are 3 no-fail ways to start the conversation. Something else that's not on here that I use a lot, and I'm betting a lot of you do too, is the I feel statement. I feel blank when you blank. So you could turn it in on yourself and say, I feel discouraged when you show up to team meetings unprepared. Here's the big thing to remember. Share only one event. You don't want to share something that happened a month ago or say you've been showing when you show up to the team meetings unprepared, I feel discouraged, and you've done it 10 times in the past 6 months. Because now what that feels like to the other person is that you've been watching them and taking notes and not saying anything. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. So you want to share only one event. Don't comment on what you think their intentions were. So you don't want to say, I know that you've been really busy and you meant to, I know you've been really busy and you meant to come. Next time, let's just make sure you do it. Let them share their intentions with you. Don't assume their intentions for them. And don't bring up the past. So stay as timely as you can and share only one event. The thing about waiting to give feedback until it's absolutely necessary is that instinctually we will share more than one event and bring up the past. So when you're giving good constructive feedback, you're only focusing on one behavior. And it's something that happened very timely. You're not referencing something from 6 months ago or 1 month ago. So the next piece is pause for understanding. So I love this picture because this cat wants to pounce on this mouse. And if you don't pause for understanding, that is exactly how the recipient will feel during a constructive feedback conversation. Like you're going to pounce at any moment. So here are some things that you can ask in order to make yourself feel more comfortable with that pause. Now remember, you don't have to ask any of these questions at all. You could just state what you saw and then wait for them to say something. But that can feel a little awkward. So here's some things you can say. So let me go back one slide and let's say a statement. Let's go to when you, so Tess, I noticed that you showed up unprepared to yesterday's team meeting. When you don't have the materials ready, I feel discouraged. Is that how you see it? Or did I get that right? Were you unprepared? Or do you remember that? These are all moments for you to get insight from the other person as to how they're feeling about what you said. So if you say, do you remember that? And I say, I do. You instantly know we're on the same page and you can keep going. If I say, I don't remember that, I had everything, I can't believe you didn't see it, you can tell that this might be a hostile conversation, and you can stop the conversation. You can actually say, you know what? Let's continue this tomorrow. Think about how that meeting went and where my concern might have come from, and then we can talk about it later this afternoon, or let's talk about it more tomorrow. So if you can sense during this pause moment that they are going to be hostile, you can shut that conversation off. Because remember, the purpose of constructive feedback is to get a behavior change. And if they are hostile at this point in the conversation, they are not going to agree to a behavior change. So there's no point to keep going. So once you pause for understanding and you either ask one of these questions or you give them a chance to weigh in, then you're going to go to the describe phase. So when I gave the example, I actually threw in the it made me feel when I was giving the example. You can do it there, or it's probably better to wait and do it here. I've noticed that in yesterday's team meeting, you showed up unprepared. Do you remember that? I do remember that. Yeah. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. Yeah, Tess, it makes me feel discouraged when I see you show up unprepared. And the effect it has on the team is they are wondering if you care enough about this project to do the work. It's very important to be very clear in this phase. Again, withhold judgment. So it made me feel discouraged, and I think that you're not a good fit for the team, and that your skills just really aren't up to par with everybody else's. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's too much. That's judgment. So it made me feel blank. It makes me think that blank. The effect it has on the team is blank. You could even say the effect it has on the company is blank. A few things about this phase that I want to be sure to share. This step helps the recipient understand the impact of their behavior. You can cover 1 to 3 areas of impact, 1 to 3 results. So you might do the result of the impact to you as the manager or peer, to the team, to the department, to the company. So you want to be sure that they are understanding the impact. Also, if you're a manager, this next reason is really important. Your perceptions and feelings matter, because as a manager, you make decisions based on that. And so your employee has the right to know how you're feeling. And they also have a right to know that your perception is different from how they've perceived something. And you owe it to them to share that. So you want to be sure that you share the impact of the behavior on your perception. It will probably naturally come out when you say a phrase of the effect it has on the team is blank, or here's what happens when blank. Perception will naturally be woven into that statement. But just be sure that they understand how you as a manager are viewing that behavior. Because even if they don't agree right now with what you're saying, they have to respect it, because you're the manager and you make decisions based on that. Again, you want to create that connection from behavior to impact. So here's this last step: discuss and agree. And the whole point of discuss and agree is that you are traveling down this road together. So criticism, you're not traveling down a road together, you're one and done. I want you to know that you're bad at this and I needed to tell you. In constructive feedback, you are driving together on a road to change behavior. So here's where you say things like, how do you feel? What is the best next step? What can you do differently? So sticking with my example of me not being prepared for the team meeting, so I've already said as the recipient that I agree, that was the behavior that showed up at the team meeting, and I've heard the impact, and now I'm being asked, Tess, what can you do differently to make sure this doesn't happen again? So now the ownership is on me, and I feel empowered to tell you what I'm going to do differently, versus me saying, you need to start showing up 10 minutes early for the team meeting so that I can check your notebook or check your computer to make sure that you have updated the Excel spreadsheet. Those two approaches feel very different. In the first approach, I feel like you're treating me like an adult who can fix the problem. In the second approach, I feel as though you are treating me like a child who doesn't know how to improve. Which one do you think will get the agreement to change? I might show up next time 10 minutes early and let you check my computer, but I'm probably cussing you under my breath and starting to search for a new job because I feel like I'm being treated unfairly. So, how do you feel? What is the next best step? And what can you do differently? Are great questions that you can ask to start off this discuss and agree section. You want to agree on specifics versus being very general. So, when you say, what is the best next step to showing up prepared for the team meeting? So, that's specific versus saying, what is the next best step to improve? That's a very general statement. Don't ever tell them to try harder. So I've given this constructive feedback and we get to the discuss and agree step and I say, Tess, just try harder next time. That's not going to work because my definition of try harder may not be yours. Your expectation of what that looks like may not be mine. Or I'm going to completely dismiss this conversation altogether because you didn't tell me what to do differently, or I didn't tell you what I'm going to do differently. You just told me to try harder. Okay, sure. I'll try harder next time. Oops, I didn't do it. So don't ever say try harder. Try not to make absolute statements like always or never. You always show up unprepared, or you should never show up unprepared again. So remove the words always and never, and ensure before the conversation is over that the employee understands the new expectations. So an easy way to do that is to have them repeat back to you. So what do we think, or excuse me, so Tess, what are you going to do next time to show up, to be sure that you show up prepared? Just want to be sure that they understand. The best way to do that is to have them repeat it. So those are the 4 steps, and let's practice together. So our steps are state observation, pause, describe, and discuss and agree. So I'll walk you through this. Here is our situation. Jim interrupted the VP in this morning's project status meeting to make a point about the timeline. This is the last straw. Not only is it annoying, but you're worried that his constant habit of interrupting could stifle growth and create a negative impression of the team. So something I want to point out in this example is you have never shared with Jim before that the interrupting is an issue. So we have to be careful here that we don't generalize and say you always interrupt. We want to be sure that we only reference this morning's project status meeting. So here we go. Let's do this together. In today's team meeting, I noticed that you interrupted Jim, or excuse me, you interrupted the VP while he was sharing his ideas about the project timeline. Do you remember that? So now we're going to give Jim a chance to validate what we've said and give us his side of the story if he wants to. Here's what happens when you interrupt the VP. He doesn't say anything in the meeting, but he carries that with him, and he will think more negatively about you because of that. I'm worried that the VP's perception could create a negative impression of your team and all the hard work you're doing to make your team so effective. How can we solve this together? I would pause after that question and let Jim jump in, and then use what could you do differently as a follow-up question. Now, in this constructive feedback model, I did not share the other times I've seen Jim interrupt, and I connected the behavior to a really big effect, and that is all the hard work you've put into the team to show how effective they are. So this feels hopefully more personal for Jim. I'm saying, I just want to be sure that this doesn't undermine everything you've been doing. Hopefully he would be on board with that. The discuss and agree piece of this conversation might actually take a little longer. So, how can we solve this together? Jim might throw out a few ideas, and I might say, these are great. How about you think about them a little more? And during our one-on-one meeting tomorrow, we can go through and determine a plan of action. So this might be a conversation that doesn't wrap up quickly. Let's end with some quick tips. So I've taken you through the START model, which is the model for positive feedback, and our quick model for constructive feedback. There's a few things I want to share that will hopefully help you when you are giving constructive feedback. The first piece is something I mentioned at the beginning. Graze, don't gorge. So a lot of times, well, first of all, take a look at that hamburger at the bottom. I don't know if I know anybody in my life that could eat that and A, eat it all anyway, but B, try to eat it and not feel miserable. So think about when you gorge on feedback, how miserable you would be after eating this, 6-layer cheeseburger. That's how miserable the other person feels. You don't want to reference multiple times you've seen a behavior. You want to graze and mention one time in today's team meeting, in yesterday's brainstorming session, not in the last, you don't want to say, in the last 10 team meetings we've had, you've been unprepared. That's gorging. Be sure you graze. Describe, don't judge. So I have mentioned this already. You want to try to stick to specific facts and not judging their behavior or putting words in their mouth in terms of what you think. Accept disagreement. So I briefly alluded to this, but if during this conversation they're not open to the feedback you're giving them, then you can stop and say, let's reconvene tomorrow. Or if you start the conversation with, are you open to some feedback? And they say no, that's okay too. I get asked this question a lot. What if I get to the discuss and agree step and they don't agree with me? Okay, that happens. If the behavior reoccurs, so on this chart, look to the right. If the behavior reoccurs and the answer is no, goal achieved. They didn't agree in the conversation, but they didn't do it again, so you actually gave them good constructive feedback. Look to the left. Does the behavior reoccur again? If the answer is yes, then you have another chance to have a constructive feedback conversation. Now, this is a big deal because now you reference the previous conversation you had. Tess, do you remember last month when we had the conversation about you not showing up for the team meeting prepared? I thought we had figured out a plan of action to prevent that from happening again, but I noticed today that you were unprepared. So now you are referencing a time when you talked to them about this before, and they can't help but agree that, oh, we did talk about that. You're right. So it's okay if they don't agree by the end of the conversation. If they change the behavior, you met your goal. And if they don't change their behavior, you did the right thing because you can reference that conversation again. And here is the biggest, most important tip of all. There's this idea out there that you should always give constructive feedback in the sandwich method, where you say something good, and then you give the feedback, and then you say something good. And I want to tell you today that that doesn't work, because when you put constructive feedback in the middle, the person forgets that feedback. They only remember what you said at the beginning and at the end, and your feedback will make no difference. So, hey, overall, you're doing a great job, but you're terrible at this. Oh, but keep up the good work. You're really great. I just left a conversation where I was told I was great. So I'm not going to change any behavior that you tried to give me constructive feedback on because you told me I was great. That's a conflicting message. So please, please, please avoid the sandwich method. When you're giving constructive feedback, only give constructive feedback. When you're giving positive feedback, only give positive feedback. Do not sandwich them together. It does not work. So to summarize, here are the two things that we've talked about today. Using the START model to give positive feedback, situation, timely, action, result, and thank you. Remember, you can give them in any order, and this is an instant thing you can do as soon as you hang up today from this webinar. When giving constructive feedback, state, pause, describe, discuss. And there's one thing that's not on this slide that I also encourage you to remember, and that is before you give constructive feedback, always, always, always ask, are you open to some feedback right now? Because you want to give the recipient a chance to say no. You could also, on positive, when you're giving positive feedback, say, hey, are you open to some feedback right now? That way, the recipient, if you have a 100% no surprises relationship, they're not going to automatically think that what you're going to say is bad. You can say, hey, Tess, are you open to some feedback right now about today's meeting? Sure. I thought you did a great job. I was really impressed with how you showed up, blah, 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 blah. So you can use that question when giving positive feedback and constructive feedback. So that's all I have for you today. It was a quick session on positive and constructive feedback. I hope everybody has a great afternoon or evening, and thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I had myself muted there for a moment. Tess,
Yes.
are you happy to answer any questions that anybody might have? I'm aware there's a few minutes left. There aren't that many people, so I think that for those who do want to ask something, this is probably a good moment as long as you have the time, Tess.
Absolutely. I would love to answer any questions.
Sure. So, anybody who wants to ask anything, please do go ahead and pop it in the questions box. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really great. Yeah, I think we'll give it probably 45 seconds or a minute or so just to see if anybody has anything that they'd like to say. In terms of upcoming webinars for everybody who's still here, you shall receive an email probably tomorrow with a registration link. I can't remember exactly what we have next week, but I think that can be the surprise for you. Alexandra just said, no questions, just wanted to say thank you, that was helpful. Thank you, Alexandra, although I know that was directed more at Tess than it was myself. I think on that, we'll probably just leave it there. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask that they don't want to ask here, or that they think of while they're either practicing or whatever that may be, please do shoot me an email at info@webinarsteam.com. That's info@webinarsteam.com. I shall either pass that on to Tess, or if it's anything that I can help with or that you need from me, such as recordings or anything like that, I will get back to you as quickly as possible. As always, we'll make the recording available to you as soon as possible. Sadly, my colleague Sydney, who has been taking the webinars recently and who's been sending out the recordings to you, has gone home ill today. So it may be another 24 hours than usual. Other than that, I don't think have anything to say other than really just to reinforce how grateful I am. Tess, that was a really great session, so thank you very much.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, great. I shall see some of you guys next week. Bye bye, everybody.